Ladies and gentlemen, the winner of this contest and new Intercontinental Champion, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of another 80s podcast where we try to bring back some of that 80s magic. My name is Wit, and I really appreciate you joining me. Today, we're reaching back to talk 80s wrestling. That's right, the Saturday mornings, the main events, the spandex. With me for what may be the pilot and finale of another 80s podcast, depending on how this goes, is my good friend Al. Thank you for taking the time.
Of course, Wick. Good morning.
What we're going to be doing here is doing, I think, what is a favorite topic of yours, especially wrestling. And we're going to be talking about 80s wrestling specifically. Is it fair to say that you're a wrestling aficionado?
Sort of, I would say, I was definitely in my heyday in the 80s when it comes to wrestling. So I lived it, I breathed it, I read up on it a little bit now. So that's up to you to decide whether I'm an aficionado or not.
Well, and plus some of our listeners and some of our friends, I'm sure will have their opinions as well. Yeah, so we're going to have a good conversation here, kind of bring back some of those feelings for what was, I think, certainly a special time. We're going to talk about some of the important things that were happening back during 80s wrestling. And we're also going to have some trivia mixed in, kind of help you.
Oh, trivia. Wasn't aware of that.
Well, I wasn't going to give you a heads up.
Are you asking me, or does the audience have to answer that? Or both?
No, they can play at home, all seven people who listen. But in this case, it's going to be mostly for you. But we're gonna see if you can earn your bones a bit on a podcast.
All right, when I get it right, looking for some prizes here.
Prizes. So this is my first one, so I'm a little behind on prizes. Like virtual props.
I was thinking more gift cards, but
I do have gift cards here. I could do that.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, but
I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully, they're large denominations.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's start us off here. And one of the main things about this podcast was trying to kind of recapture some of those moments here. So it's a Saturday morning, whatever year you want to pick during the 80s. Paint us a picture. What's watching wrestling look like in 1980, whatever?
Yeah. So in the 80s, we're going to go to the early 80s here. My heyday was growing up in and around the Philadelphia area, definitely what was then, I guess, the WWWF, right? I believe Worldwide Wrestling Federation. I started to follow it when Superstar Billy Graham was champ, which would have been the late 70s, kind of loosely, but really got into it in the very early 80s with Bob Backlund. I was a huge Backlund fan. But yeah, and on Saturdays, it was on UHF, channel maybe... I think there was 3 UHF channels, like 17, 29, and 48 in my area. Do I have that right?
That sounds right.
Recollection?
And to clarify for our listeners, he's not referring to the Weird Al Yankovic movie.
Oh, that's true. Is that an 80s movie as well, I assume?
Yeah, it's like 1989. It didn't do particularly well, but it's watchable. But yeah, I think those are the right channels, 17, 29, and 48.
Yeah, so I don't think it was on 48, doing this off of total memory. I think there was 2 programs every Saturday. So before when I was a younger teenager, 13 or 14, I would definitely dial into both of them. And over time, I started to, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, started to document the results of all the matches. So I would have the date it aired. There's usually 5 or 6 matches. Most of them at the time were squash matches, right? Very rarely did you see 2 of the top stars meet on TV. They kind of held that for the big events, the Philly Spectrum or Madison Square Garden in New York. But yeah, I would document it and, how they would win, if it was pin, submission, time of match. I even, if there was blood in the match, which it wasn't often on TV, but occasionally there might be, I would have a star next to the result indicating that, blood was drawn somehow in the match.
All right.
And then so a document that, like I said, I think most weekends there were two different shows, and I think they were mostly filmed at the Hamburg Fieldhouse in Hamburg, Pennsylvania, Berks County. It was never there. I don't know why. It's not, it was probably an hour away from where we grew up. I did go to the Philly Spectrum once in a while for some of the events there. Would watch them on Prism at my grandparents' house. Would document them as well. And then I, kind of formulated my own point system, my own top 10 ranking system, because I was a big time buyer of the wrestling magazines, the Bill Apter magazines at the time, like Inside Wrestling, The Wrestler. The probably most popular one of my favorite was Pro Wrestling Illustrated, which always came with like a color poster in the middle. But they had their own ranking system of, WWF, NWA, AWA, tag teams, most popular, most hated, all that type of stuff. So I was emulating that a little bit. And like I said, I actually had a point system. Like if you beat somebody who was in the top 10, you would earn 3 points.
Okay.
If you beat somebody who I deemed wasn't a total jobber, like you beat Dominic DiNucci or Baron Mikel Cicluna, you would get 2 points. But if you just annihilated a total jobber, you would only get 1 point. So you would accumulate points, and I would somehow use these points in ranking the top 10.
Well, I like it that it's not completely arbitrary. You've got a rating system, and you tried to hold yourself accountable. Which,
that's like if you beat these 3 jobbers, it's equivalent to beating Ivan Putski or somebody like that.
I like that. This is certainly probably not what your average wrestling viewer was doing, but I'm certainly a fan of it. Before I ask you a follow-up question to that, I think what you're describing, because I didn't get any of the wrestling magazines back. Actually, that's true. That's not true. I probably had some. I just didn't get them regularly. But I think on Facebook, I've certainly seen somebody post pictures of those. The rankings, where it'd be like columns, just of each one of those.
Yeah, the rankings were like the best part, especially because, again, I lived in WWF territory, but I still enjoyed reading about guys in the NWA, guys in the AWA. So seeing the rankings, I don't know, I thought was pretty cool. Like I would get the magazine sometimes and I would call up my buddy who I went to, I guess, middle school with at the time, and we would talk wrestling and the rankings and, just kind of nerded out to that type of stuff.
So when you would get the rankings, like you've got your own, but then you get we'll just call them the official rankings. They come in. Would you look at it? They'd be like, this is crazy. Just like stew.
Yeah, because they always had, I think if I remember, they sort of had, like where I had the point system, they might have had their own system in that, all right, if Bob Backlund was champion, the Intercontinental holder was automatically ranked second or something, So I didn't necessarily know that was deserved. I think you had to earn your spot. If you kept losing, maybe you held on to the title, but you lost a lot of matches by count out or disqualification. So that the title, you retain the title, but you're losing the match. Like I would, I think, penalize people for that more so than those wrestling magazines.
So do you think your rankings were better?
I do.
Yeah. All right.
Well, because I don't know how, again, my rankings were simply based on what I saw on TV and Spectrum Wrestling on Prism, whether I went there in person or, again, when I went over to my grandparents' house and watched it. So it was very, I wasn't, they wrestled in New York, Maryland, up in New England, like none of that. I didn't know the outcome of that. Now, with the advent of cable on USA Network, they would occasionally air a card from Madison Square Garden, like on a Monday or Tuesday night, just randomly. So if I watched that got entered into my rankings as well. That was towards the end that was sort of before WWF blew up really big. But I would enter that into my rankings. But I would get pissed off when I saw like the same exact match. I'm like, didn't that just happen like a month ago? Like I remember when Mr. Fuji turned on Tiger Chung Lee. I was there at the Philly Spectrum, And then like a week or two later, I'm watching the Madison Square Garden broadcast, and the exact same thing happened. And I'm thinking, I can't believe Tiger Chung Ling fell for this twice. You would think he would learn better.
Well, he wasn't known for his mental prowess; it was physical.
That's when I realized, up until then, I thought it was all legit. But that's when that particular small angle led me to believe it might be predetermined.
I mean,
I'm
there
being
were
sarcastic,
signs.
but yeah.
Exactly. So when you would keep your statistics, you would keep your rankings. So it's a Saturday morning, like,
Mm-hmm.
and are you doing it immediately? So you're writing them down as you go.
I'm right as they happen. Magnificent Morocco beat Steve King in 6 minutes and 4 seconds by pin or by submission. Yeah,
So
so it's live. Yeah.
so you put it all down. The wrestling program ends. You walk
Mhm.
away. How long are you holding off before you go back and look at it again? Is it like 10 minutes later in the day? Is it like 3 days? You got to let it, kind of sit there, like, or is it something like throughout the week until next Saturday? You're like, you're kind of looking at them again.
Yeah, I don't know that I was, poring over them every day. Generally, I would sometimes at night. I would just kind of page through it, just kind of sort it a little better. And I think what I would do is monthly is when I would do my rankings because I know those magazines came out monthly, so I kind of adhered to that. So loosely, I would like the first of the month, I would kind of look back at the previous month's rankings. I would see what transpired over the last 30 days and I would adjust the rankings, so you would move up or move down. I would have arrows up, arrows down, just to indicate where you were trending. And it was really like I loved it. I wish I still had that. I don't know what the hell I did with it. Either I threw it out or my mom threw it out, I'm sure. My mom, even when I started to work, because I got my first job at age, was almost 16, and I was working Saturdays and Sundays. I would task my mom with watching it and draw down the results for me, which was, I can't believe she did it because it's not like, you didn't have a DVR or anything. She had to watch it live and she might get some of the names wrong. And I'd be like, who's this wrestler? I have like sometimes I would pick it up, but once in a while, like I just had no idea who she was talking about. And as a 6-year-old kid, I'm like, come on, mom, like you need to be better.
Obviously, I've met your mom, and she's a saint. Like, there's no way Bob ever would have recorded
Well,
that.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you're
No,
like,
like looking back at it, I can't believe she agreed to it. It was just so asinine. Like, I'm sure she's like, when's this kid gonna like get in the girls or something? I got to watch. He's still watching two guys like in spandex shorts wrestle with one another. Like it's she probably wanted me working, hanging out with girls, being with friends, whatever, and just yeah, I kind of because back then wrestling was sort of that underground thing where like it was even I think more more nerdy than it is today to be into wrestling. Like if people knew you were in the wrestling, you would get made fun of a little bit.
okay. You had mentioned something earlier where this is WWF country, and this is something where you're way more familiar with the history than I am. But I think it's safe to say that in the 80s, the WWF takes over.
Yeah.
And I know that wrestling before was very regional. So
Yes.
give us a little background on what it was like before. And there's obviously a huge transition in the 80s of what wrestling becomes. So what was it like
Hmm.
before, and kind of what's the short version of how we got there?
Yeah, this is my impression, and of how it was back in the again going back to when I started following it in the late '70s, and then getting into the '80s. Yeah, you had territories, and the big three were the WWF, which sort of was the Northeast, um, NWA National Wrestling Alliance, which was the longest tenured. They were down south, Carolinas, Georgia, Tennessee, and then you had the AWA, which was Midwest, Chicago, Minnesota, that area. So they were the big three. And when you got those magazines, they were sort of the focus. There were other areas, but they were certainly the big three, and they were the three champions that were recognized to have the most clout. So at that time, it was Bob Backlund, might have been Harley Race in the NWA, and then AWA was either Nick Bockwinkel primarily, or to a lesser degree, say Vern Gagne. And I kind of thought in the NWA, which reading about it, I thought was really cool because it had like sub territories. So if you were NWA champ, you might travel to Georgia for a couple weeks and you'd wrestle the competition there. And that Georgia Championship Wrestling would, hey, we got, Harley Race, we got Ric Flair here the next 2 weeks. And that was a really big draw. And then that champion might go to Florida and do the same thing for a couple weeks. So he would just travel to the different, I'll say, sub territories of the NWA. And they did cool stuff where even if there was a title change, the rule was the new champion inherited the schedule of the prior champion. Okay. So you would see some interesting matches. You might see two heels wrestle that ordinarily wouldn't wrestle, or two fan favorites wrestle because you're inheriting that person's schedule. I always thought that was cool. Like, I don't know that we quite got that up here in the WWE, or what was the WWF. Yeah, so you had that. With the advent of cable TV and TBS had Georgia Championship Wrestling, and it started to pick up a national audience because of cable, and it became really popular. And that's, I think, where probably, a wrestler like Ric Flair kind of just gained mass popularity at the time. It was before, Vince McMahon Sr. passed away and the WWF expansion. But that was really cool. And it was a different brand of, wrestling. And I've heard you use that term before. A little rougher, right? Mm-hmm. A little more real, I thought. They were on their weekly shows. You would see better matchups than you would, like I said earlier. WWF was more just squash matches, constant squash matches, and an occasional angle would play out on TV, like Pat Patterson and Sergeant Slaughter, like breaking the Cobra Clutch, Angelo Mosca against Pat Patterson with the water pitcher being banged over his head. But that seemed to be more regular in the NWA. So, yeah, I thought that was really cool. That's what I grew up on. I kind of liked that. Obviously, once McMahon figured, hey, I can make a lot of money, bringing in a lot of talent, expanding, that sort of died. I don't want to say it was a long, painful death. It was pretty quick, actually, in many cases.
Let's take some time to rewind.
Big match at my house. I'll bring my guys. You have yours. I've got Junkyard Dog.
It's World Wrestling Federation Superstars.
I've got Brutus Beefcake. Here's George the Animal Steel. I've got Great Hammer Valentine. Ricky the Dragon Steel.
Yeah. They're so real.
And Rowdy Roddy Piper.
Can you tell the difference? Wrestling Superstars. They're for real. Each sold separately from LJN.
Yeah!
Al, we've mentioned the McMahons a couple times in this episode already, so now seems as good a time as any. Is it true that they kind of broke some unwritten rules about poaching wrestlers?
Yeah, that's I should have mentioned that, Whit. That's a great question. So yeah, before there was, like you said, there was unwritten rules like, hey, this is our territory. You don't come here and we don't go there, right? And I think for the most part, the promoters abided by that. I remember as a kid, like you would get that cross-promotional championship match once in a while. For example, Backlund wrestled Flair at the Omni in Atlanta, and that was like a huge deal. You had Harley Race, and this, I don't know if this might have been the 70s, but Harley Race came to Madison Square Garden and wrestled superstar Billy Graham. Now, clearly, the titles would never change. Like that, that just wouldn't happen. Most times would be a draw somehow, a double count out, a time limit draw. Once in a while, you might have a count out or a disqualification, but that was like a big deal at the territory era when there would be those cross promotional matches. But yeah, there was that unwritten rule. And I think once, McMahon Sr. passed, McMahon Jr. had a vision, and, he just figured, screw it. I'm here to grow this thing. These unwritten rules don't matter to me. I'm going to expand it, make a ton of money. And that's exactly what he did. And he pissed a lot of people off, including, like myself. I was very much anti, WWF when that happened. and I kind of clung to the NWA at the time because they started to do the same thing. Never had the success, quite the success that the WWF did. I always remember I would argue with my dad, who he knew about wrestling, and he would always tell me like, "Hey, the NWA is going to become more and more like the WWF over time." And I would fight him tooth and nail, like, "Come on, nah, they're about wrestling." And well, he was right. They became the WCW. They got a little more cartoonish, right? So he was, you follow the money, as a lot of people say, and that's exactly what happened.
I want to imagine that like several dinners were ruined by the conversation where you're like,
no, it wasn't that, quite that bad. But we would argue. Like I would argue. I remember a common argument was like, who's more popular, Jimmy Superfly Snuka or Pete Rose? Like with people, and I would say it was Superfly Snuka at the time, but he would say Pete Rose. He was probably right, but in my small world, everybody knew who Superfly was.
well, later you may have been proven correct because Pete Rose, did himself a little bit of a disservice where Snuka's antics weren't in the news as much.
Well, yeah, but they ended up being in the news later, right?
That's true.
We were talking about two individuals that they were great performers in their respective sports, but I would say both weren't the greatest people in the world.
I think that's a safe statement for sure.
Yeah.
And,
If you're a murderer, I just I have a problem with that, Wit.
times change, buddy. That was the 80s. You've mentioned the AWA and the NWA. So I'm somebody who I'm roughly 6 years younger than you. So I was very much into the WWF because that's when it kind of hit.
Yeah.
I always thought the AWA and NWA were Southern. I assumed almost every other thing was Southern compared to.
Okay. Well, I mean, NWA certainly, like Florida. They would always have awesome angles. I thought, like, who Kevin Sullivan is,
Yeah.
Right? Like Kevin Sullivan had a satanic. I don't know if you've ever seen any of the videos. He had like a satanic gimmick in Florida, where he like sort of brainwashed people, like Mark Lewin and Bob Roop, who was like a credentialed Olympic wrestler, and he became pro. And then Sullivan brainwashed him, and he shaved his head, and just did all this bad shit. And they went up against like Dusty Rhodes and Blackjack Mulligan, and they would, it was crazy. Like they got a shit ton of heat in Florida for doing what they did. And at the time, you weren't 100% sure it was not on the up and up. Kayfabe was alive and real, so I think they got a ton of heat down there. And his wife, which was Nancy Benoit,
Okay.
she was a little younger than him, and she was. I'm drawing a blank on her name, but she had a character, and there was other female characters, Luna Vachon, and she got her start down there. And they would shave their heads, like these girls would shave half their heads on TV, and they would have snakes and stuff. And it was crazy. But I liked it. Like, it was cool. Like, for me, I'm like, man, that's hardcore. I don't see any of that up here in the Northeast.
It's funny that you say that because I think because of my age, because it's so I was born in 74, so I'm 10 when like the WWF is starting really moving along here.
Yeah, that's you were in their that's who they wanted to win over, right? Those young kids.
And I think obviously they won over way more than that, but it would be funny. I would watch AWA and NWA. I wouldn't say in a pinch. I don't mean it like, that it wasn't good, but I just remember just looking at the characters and kind of my mentality at the time where certainly the WWF, we'll talk more about this. Like the characters were bigger. Like it was just, a little bit more, I don't know if cheesy is the word, but it was just, they weren't, hey, this person's really bad because of this. They've got a costume as well. It's just, and it kind of hit harder when I looked at some of the AWA and NWA, I'd look at that, and even with the Four Horsemen, and this is probably not a good way to start first episode, but most of the time I'm like, okay, yeah, Ric Flair, I get it. Arn Anderson, I'm like, this is just a guy in tights. Like, it's just like, I couldn't, at that age, I couldn't really decipher. They weren't, the lines weren't drawn as, I guess, as neatly. So for something like me, I always had trouble at that age getting into it.
Hmm.
Yeah, just, it was,
Yeah, that's interesting because and I get why you say that. Like Tully Blanchard, Arn, Ole Anderson, they were just hard-nosed wrestlers, right? They would
yeah,
go in, kick ass. They were good on the mic. They cheated, they ganged up on people, they drew heat, right? But then they got popular. Like I think they were so good at what they did, they gained popularity where ultimately they came to the other side. But that run as the Four Horsemen was awesome. But I get that. As 10-year-old you wanted to see a guy with a painted face, with an awesome physique, and like doing whatever antics he's doing in the ring, like the Ultimate Warrior or Hulk Hogan. When I think you would recognize they don't have the technical ability or the skill set that an Arn Anderson and a Tully Blanchard did, right?
oh yeah.
Because if you say otherwise, I'm getting the hell out of here now.
I mean, that would be reasonable. That is something where I'm gonna come back around to, because I think we'll have some good examples here. But yeah, I think at that age, I just couldn't detect it. It was just kind of like I was looking for, I don't know if it's called more theater or whatever it
Yeah,
was.
I'm sure. Well, you think about it, like if I think this is the genius of McMahon in the business sense of, hey, if I win over the kids and you were 10 or somebody's 13 and they want to come see my events, how do they get there? Their parents have to bring them,
Mhm.
right? So now instead of getting, two brothers, you get a family going out, right? Maybe the parents get into it a little bit because their kids are into it. And I think that worked. It really became family friendly, and it kind of got it onto the map and some of the deals with MTV and whatnot, and some of the stars he brought in, kind of non-wrestling stuff. Yeah, it worked. Like there's no doubt about that. Obviously, I can't say it didn't work. I hated it
Mhm.
as a wrestling purist. Like it really turned me off and it infuriated me, um, because I wanted the wrestling, I wanted the realism. I didn't need it. I needed some showmanship, but not quite that much,
Mhm.
if that makes sense. And I wasn't alone there, obviously. And I think NWA kind of had that niche for a while, where they would do competing shows in Philadelphia. Philly would, the WWF would run the Spectrum, NWA would run the Civic Center, which I think was a little smaller, but there were some nights they were there the same night where the NWA outdrew the WWF,
Oh,
which
okay.
is just crazy. But I think that they definitely had that old school niche that people missed with what the WWF had in their programming those years.
Yeah, that's something I knew that, obviously they were competing, especially in the, throughout the 80s, they're competing. It's not like they
Yes.
just disappeared or something like that. I just know it was stronger in the first half of the decade. And speaking of kind of that taking over, the thing you didn't like now, uh, I think it's non-controversial to say that Hulk Hogan is the biggest wrestler of the 80s, for right or wrong, right?
Yeah, yeah, I would agree.
So I want to make sure I have my
Terrible.
I want to
And
make
by
sure
the
I
way,
have
the
my
water you
history.
gave me has a leak in it. I got like water all over my desk now.
Really?
So yeah, you need to just not give your guests uh, like either a dribble glass or like a bottle of water with a hole in the bottom because it's been all over the place.
Well, unfortunately, this is a podcast. I don't even have it on video. So
I
what's
know.
awesome is
I'm
my
like, what the
thinking
hell?
is,
Like I have my phone laying. I'm like, why is my phone all wet here?
well,
So,
like, this is how good I am at running a podcast. Like when I planned to do that, I was like, this is going to be awesome, not realizing there's no video.
yeah, yeah. Think
Um,
that twice. Yeah.
well, at the break, I'll get you some more water. So it's non-controversial to say that Hulk Hogan is the biggest wrestler of the 80s, right or wrong, right?
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to make sure I've got my history of how Hulkamania starts. It's
Okay. Yeah.
1982. Rocky
Mhm.
3 comes out.
Yeah.
He's Thunderlips.
Underlips. Yeah.
Vince McMahon sees him for the first time and goes, "This guy's got something." And then it just takes off from there. Is that how it started?
No. Wait,
Oh,
are you serious? I know you can't because he was in the WWF prior to that,
I
right?
know.
As a
I'm just,
heel.
but I saw Rocky 3. You're like, wait, like, I'm sure I'm not the only one who thought that at some point. They're like, oh, he plucked him out of this movie.
Yeah. Yeah. So he, as I understand it, he was wrestling a little bit in some of those territories we talked about earlier as Sterling Golden, I think is what he went by. Like big dude, even had some feuds with Andre, like arm wrestling matches and, I forget where, but maybe like, Memphis or Mid-South. So they sort of had pitted them against one another already. Now, eventually came to the WWF as Hulk Hogan. Classy Freddie Blassie, who you probably remember, was his manager. And for those out there, at the time, I loved it because he had those 3 heel managers: Fred Blassie, Lou Albano, and the Grand Wizard, Ernie Roth, who also managed the original Sheik, in a different territory, which was really cool. But anyhow, Hogan came in as a heel, challenged Backlund for the title a little bit, didn't win it, and then feuded with Andre, where Andre was the face, obviously, at the time, and Hogan was the bad guy. I believe, if I have my story straight, it culminated. WWF ran a card at Shea Stadium in New York, where that was one of the co-main event, maybe. Steel cage. No, that was the steel cage match was San Martino against Zbyszko. That's right. But Hogan and Andre were on the card, as was Backlund and Pedro Morales. They beat the Samoans for the championship, tag championship, which Backlund had it was funny. I'm getting off on a side topic here, so I apologize.
That's okay. Go for it.
But Morales and Backlund beat the Samoans, but because they already held belts, and the rule at the time was you couldn't hold 2 belts, they had to let the tag team titles go, and then they did a tournament, and the Samoans won them back. Like, just kind of funny why they did that. But so you had so Hogan came in as a heel probably for a year and a half, had his thing, and then he went over to the AWA, where that's sort of where. So Vern Gagne was kind of running AWA at the time. Nick Bockwinkel was their champion, very good technical wrestler. He was a heel, good on the mic, good match skills, good wrestler, could draw some heat. And then Hogan goes over there as a face, and the fans eat it up. Like, they're just, breaking box office records. They teased him winning the title a couple times, like some, where you would, I think at the time, like if you threw somebody over the top rope, it was an automatic disqualification, right? So that would have happened. Maybe the ref got knocked out. Bockwinkel was thrown over the top rope, or Hogan was, and then they'd get back in the ring, and the ref would come to, and Hogan would do a leg drop and pin him, and fans go wild. But then, Hogan got thrown over the top rope 3 minutes ago, so it should have been a disqualification. So, he never quite won the title. But I think McMahon saw this from afar. It's like, man, this guy can, he gets crowds hyped. He's the guy that I want to, do this with. I want to put the belt on him. Kids are going to like him. The fans are going to love him. And, he reached out to him, offered him, I'm sure, a ton of money. And, I think there was some bad blood at the time. Vern Gagne, not the rumor that I heard was, he just wasn't giving Hogan any money, or just not enough money for the merchandising, because the merchandising was just blowing up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So Gagne was making all that money, and Hogan was either making none or just not enough. And I'm sure McMahon said, hey, you're going to be a big part of this. I'm going to give you more money. You're going to be part of the merchandising. He had a vision that Gagne didn't. And, Gagne's taken a lot of heat over the years. Like, why the hell didn't you, maybe the AWA would have been that if they put the belt on Hogan. I don't necessarily agree with that. Like, maybe they should have put the belt on with Hogan, but without that vision, I don't think the AWA could have nearly done what Vince did with the WWF.
Yeah, I think that sounds, clearly we're going to talk about it a couple different times in this, where it's like that joke from what is it, School of Rock? Who are the Rolling Stones? They did everything that the Beatles did just 6 months later.
Yeah,
it's just it's like some sort of joke like that, where being first is a huge difference, and plus it's like it wasn't just first. WWF just made everything bigger, just everything from the venue to the, we'll talk about pay-per-views as well. But
yeah,
but
and they would buy up spots. Like there was, so I mentioned about Georgia Championship Wrestling being on on TBS, right? So McMahon went in and basically bought that spot, and I remember they called it Black Friday. So when all the fans tuned in thinking they were getting Georgia Championship Wrestling one Friday, they got WWF. And it was like just a dark day in professional wrestling. But he would do that. He would go into these territories, and just if they had a deal with a local cable channel or a UHF channel, he would go to these, because these guys were probably running these channels on, shoestring budgets. Hey, you're paying, this Mid-South is paying you $1,000 a week to air their programming. We'll give you $5, right? And what are they going to do? Say no? They're going to take that. So they started to just take over television stations of, down south, just to get these people introduced to WWF wrestling.
I had never heard that.
Black Friday was huge in the industry.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I mean, clearly nobody's going to argue whether there's plenty of people that think Vince McMahon's dick, but I don't think anybody can argue that the guy isn't astute. That is for sure.
Yeah, good businessman.
That was part one of what may feel like a 26-part series chronicling 80s wrestling. In reality, the conversation will be over 3 parts, followed by an episode where Al and I break down some seminal 80s wrestling videos. I'm just starting off with part 1 since this is my first rodeo, and I'm assuming it will take some adjustments with the feedback I receive. I want to thank a couple people, starting with my friend Joe. I couldn't have gotten this off the ground without your support. Everybody should check out Joe's awesome podcast, Films at First Sight, where he and his co-host Grant review movies where one of them is seeing the movie for the first time. I'd also like to thank my friend Fran for helping with some of the technical aspects I couldn't wrap my brain around. Thanks to Full Boy Media, who produced the opening music to another 80s podcast. I hope to catch you on the next episode where we continue our 80s wrestling conversation. Thanks for rewinding with me. That was part 1 of what may feel like a 26-part series chronically. That was part 1 of what may feel like a 26-part series chronicling 8. That was part 1 of what may feel like a 26-part series chronicling. That was part 1 of what may feel like a 26-part series chronicling 80. Chronicling. That was part 1 of what